All right, I call to order the Historic Preservation Commission regular meeting. Cindy, will you do roll call?
Terry? Chris? Mike?
Here.
Jim? Here. Cindy is here. Rochelle? And Carol?
Yes, here.
All right, I'll now entertain a motion to approve the agenda and the minutes for the May 26th meeting.
I second.
Cindy, roll call?
Terry? Chris? Mike?
Aye.
Jim?
Aye.
Cindy is aye. Rochelle? And Carol?
Aye.
Do we also need to approve the minutes for our special meeting on June 9th?
It was a work session, so you definitely can if you want. I sent them out just to,
Okay, well, I'll entertain a
Yes.
motion to
Yep.
approve the minutes for our special meeting on June 9th.
I so move.
Second.
Roll call?
Terry? Chris? Mike?
Aye.
Jim?
Aye.
I am a aye. Rochelle? And Carol?
Aye.
All right, discussion on the historic preservation plan, which is what we discussed in that special meeting on June 9th. Basically coming out of there, we looked at forming two subcommittees, one on historical context and survey committee, and one on education and outreach subcommittee.
so I reached out to individuals that had been named as potential working on the historical context and survey subcommittee. And we did get a few that would be very interested in working on that subcommittee. We had a preliminary meeting last week to discuss certain things about architecture and historic resources within the community. We have an individual here who's said yes to working on that subcommittee, Bob Sulman, as well as Loretta Bailey, George Stevens, Maisie Myers, and Ron Taylor.
Excellent. And that's the historical context?
Yes.
Okay. So then also the education and outreach, I know, Jim, you showed some interest.
Yeah, and I've given it some thought, begun to organize some material. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to get together due to unforeseen events, trying to get my fifth wheel ready to travel. I'll be back by July 1st, so we can get to work seriously at that point. I apologize for the delay, but life happens.
So I guess we can vote to approve these subcommittees.
Was there, I couldn't remember, in other individuals that had expressed an interest in the education and outreach? I know Tom had expressed serving on that committee,
I think
subcommittee.
Rochelle as well.
And Rochelle as well. Beyond that, I couldn't remember who else was named as wanting to be a part of that. Yeah, if there was somebody else on the commission that wanted to also be a part of that.
I'd be interested.
Okay,
Yeah, me as well, Jim.
okey-doke.
So I would entertain a motion to form these two subcommittees, the historical context survey subcommittee and the education and outreach subcommittee. Do we need to include the individuals in that motion or just the formation of the committees?
If we know who they are, it'd probably be a good idea just to put it on record. that those individuals have expressed an interest in serving on that, definitely.
And those names are on the agenda, correct? Is that where I saw those names?
I think the ones I knew of for the subcommittee for the historical context are named in the roll call.
In the roll call?
Yeah.
Okay.
For forming
Yes,
that
thank you
subcommittee.
for
Yep.
Yeah, thank you for including that.
And I couldn't remember all the ones for the,
So we need to.
I'm sorry.
Do a vote for each one of those or for all of them?
Yeah, we probably could do it separately,
Do them individually.
one for each
Individually? Okay.
individually.
So that's a motion to create the committee, or?
Yeah, the
Okay.
subcommittee. The
So I'll
subcommittee.
move we create a historical context and survey subcommittee with the individuals that we've identified serving on it.
And I believe Chris Jenkins was interested
Yes,
in that as
yes,
well.
he was also on that.
I'll second it.
Roll call?
Terry? Chris? Mike?
Aye.
Jim?
Aye.
Cindy's an aye. Rochelle? And Carol?
Aye.
All right, motion is passed. I'd also entertain a motion for the formation of the Education and Outreach Subcommittee.
This is a separate vote?
Right.
I move that we establish an education and outreach subcommittee for the historic preservation plan with the individuals we've identified serving on it.
Question, do we have a list of anyone else that is interested in being on that committee?
Oh, the guest that we had at the work session,
Kathy Gunther?
Kathy, yes, we might want to include her too. I think she expressed an interest at the work session.
Did she receive an email for this meeting? Do you know?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, good. That's my thing. I second the motion.
Roll call?
Just gonna do the ones that are present. Mike?
Aye.
Jim?
Aye.
Cindy's an aye. And Carol?
Aye.
Okay. Discussion, review of certificate of alteration application form.
So as to the previous regular meeting that we had and looked over the application form, I did make those modifications that were recommended at that meeting. Along with that, I had thought I should add the specific language relating to the city's ordinance that talks about specifically the alteration requirements in that ordinance. Upon reading that more carefully, there is a point that it talks about historic districts and additional criteria for non-contributing buildings within a historic district, that it is part of the commission shall consider reviewing those properties as well as contributing properties that are wanting to do alterations on their building. I know that was a concern brought up by commissioners at the last meeting. With that being said, we might want to look at possibly amending the ordinance or making suggestions to City Council about amending that. The trick with that and amending the ordinance, we have to make sure that we're still in compliance with the State Historic Preservation Office in being a CLG, a certified local government. Altering the ordinance, we might put our status in jeopardy, depending on what we alter. So I did send out an email to the State Historic Preservation Office, their CLG representative, who's filling in. I have not heard back from them regarding amending specifically the lines about non-contributing buildings, surveying, or I should say, looking at and requiring them to submit a certificate of alteration application with us prior to doing any alterations for their property. So I'm still waiting to hear back on that. We can look at that further, obviously, at the next meeting, if that's the direction the commission feels that we would want to go, and looking at changing that. It's up to you.
Yeah, I'd be interested in seeing if that's an option.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of going over the example application too. It kind of gets into non-contributing buildings also, and
Yeah.
even if it's in a historic district but not historic, and the rules with that are more, you don't want to alter it to make it seem historic.
Yes,
Which
exactly.
I think that's important. You know, I don't know if, you know, someone having a building that's not on any registry, it just happens to be in the district, that's where
Yeah,
having them have to follow the rules also.
Yeah.
Gets kind of iffy.
Clarifying question, so we are more concerned about a contributing property versus a non-contributing party. Is that what you're, building, is that what you're saying, is that?
yeah,
we might
so,
wanna focus our energy on that?
yeah, I know this was a concern that was brought up at the last meeting, contributing versus non-contributing, and would they be required to fill out and having, for a non-contributing building, a certificate of alteration application within, for the Historic Preservation Commission to review. This, I think, and this was another concern for the building department as well. So this would be one more step that an owner would have to be required to do, them not realizing it. So if you want to look at wanting to modify that section or offer amendment or suggestion amending that section, I can also reach out to the city's attorney as well.
So is that item G? the
Yes,
historic-
yeah,
Okay.
item G.
So I guess our discussion is whether that should be included in the recommended
Amendment,
alteration.
yeah. Yep. And once I hear back from the State Historic Preservation Office and the CLG advisor, what they would recommend in editing that a little bit, or if we can amend that without jeopardizing our CLG status.
And so it lists, non-contributing buildings should be compatible with contributing
yep.
building. Non-contributing buildings should not attempt to mimic or duplicate the historical feature of contributing buildings. And contemporary designs that creatively draw upon the important characteristics of a historic district are favored. So they're not necessarily, yeah, they're not having to follow the Secretary of the Interior standards.
Exactly. But it's still another component for that owner to have to, of their process in obtaining a building permit that they probably didn't expect to do, and it's just another, add-on that might be lengthy, time-consuming, more than what they expected.
So I guess the point is that everything we're focused on applies to designated buildings. And this would be an undesignated building in a historic district.
Exactly.
And so the question is whether we can really extend the review to that undesignated building in a historic district.
Yes.
I think the review would be a lot less stringent.
Yeah,
It's more
Yeah,
or less,
it's just,
you know, are you gonna put on this crazy plane crash architecture facade next to this beautiful historic building? So, yeah, I think it's a good discussion to have, whether,
so we need to get a little more information on whether we can appropriately include item G in the guidelines or the
yeah.
alteration certificate. Do we need to just
I
table
mean-
this until we get more information, or can we
Yeah,
act on the rest of it?
we
and-
certainly can table
add that?
this, and especially wait and see what I hear back from the State Historical Preservation Office on whether or not amending this in any way would jeopardize our status as a CLG.
Yeah.
I think that might be the contingent part.
Okay, so I guess the appropriate thing would be to move to table the alteration certificate until our next meeting, when we have additional information on how to treat non-contributing buildings in historic districts.
I think, but before we table it, I'd kind of like to compare what we have to the example that Lisa sent out. I kind of like their checklist, which some of it was kind of redundant. And I was trying to figure out I guess the three sections they had. But I know we had talked about making it very clear on how we make our decisions. So from project to project, it's
Consistent.
yeah, it's consistent. And in the example, let's see, it does say, it's on page 3, what is the criteria for approval of a certificate of alteration? Well, talking about alterations in general, it almost seemed like this was, if they were doing something that didn't necessarily 100% follow the Secretary of the Interior standards, then we look at it, and with for whatever reason they're doing, if they have to turn, an existing window into a doorway, that would alter the historical look of the building, but are we able to approve or disapprove that, depending on what reason they give for that alteration?
Yes, yes. You can well, the other aspect is establishing those guidelines. If they're wanting to make those alterations, have something in written form to back that up. You can definitely make that decision. They could also appeal that decision of the commission. There is a way to do an appeals process as part of our city ordinance. So if an appeal, they still might be able to do what they want with the building, regardless of what decision the commission makes. Offering suggestions and helping them preserve the historical integrity of the building is probably the best thing that the commission can do, and offering suggestions. And on how to better preserve, the building. I know I think the page that you're referring to for the examples are that city's ordinance.
Yeah, it says in the, at the very top, the commission shall be guided by the design criteria and guidelines developed by the commission and adopted by the city council.
Yeah.
So we technically can have our own guidelines
Yes.
that may or may not be as stringent as the Secretary of the Interior standards.
The Secretary of Interior Standards is a benchmark, definitely. But especially when you're looking at historic districts and potentially non-contributing buildings, having those other guidelines in place would be of benefit.
And potentially, if our guidelines were less stringent, if they were applying for tax credits, they still may not qualify for them even if they satisfy our guidelines, but don't satisfy
Exactly,
History Colorado's.
exactly.
So I guess in addition to, right, what this example has a little more of, maybe is an explanation of their guidelines compared to just our application.
And they put some of actually all of this, the pages, subsequent pages, a part of their application form is directly from their city ordinance.
Okay.
So if there's like definitions and descriptions, and their process was literally defined in their ordinance.
Yeah, I like that, because to me, it's just right there. They don't have to go look for it, they don't have to come in
Right.
here and get a copy of it.
The one thing they didn't define, which I don't know what it is zoning designation HL versus H.
Is that on what,
In the number 1 of that checklist of section 1.
oh,
And I think they refer to it a few times throughout, and yeah.
historic landmark versus historic? Which is, yeah, I'm wondering if it's supposed to be historic landmark versus part of a historic district.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure either. I look at,
It was just something random that
yeah,
bothered me about it.
that would be my guess, but I
Yeah.
could be wrong.
So Mike, you're suggesting that we expand the application to include more of the checklist in the example?
The checklist, and in ours, under scope of work, we kind of have a checklist too.
It was mainly for attachments, that we asked them to have a detailed description of the proposed alteration and purpose of the alterations, a photo of the property as it looks, and photographs showing the location of the proposed alterations, and drawings. And I also added, as a request, have they reviewed the Secretary of Interior standards?
Yeah, I guess one thing I like making it, when people fill this out, I think they should really know kind of what they're getting into. And their checklist seemed to make it more clear, asking, like, will the construction or alteration covered by this application repair or replace an element of the building or property with a material different from the original material of that element? It seems more clear, kind of, when they're applying for this and filling out the application, answering those questions, it's more clear that they may be going in the wrong direction, instead of just checking a box, going through this process. We say, nope, and send it back to them.
So you like this format
Yeah,
better? Okay.
it seems like ours is just kind of asking what they're doing, where this, some of it focuses more on asking, you know,
You understand what you're doing.
yeah, are you doing something that's not gonna be approved? I think ours could be a little more clear on that. Bottom line, it's gonna be an extra step in a permit process. So we wanna make it as clear as possible and make it as easy as possible when they fill it out the first time, that, you know, they get it right the first time, and they may, at that point, or even look at this during design process and say, you know, oh, okay, you know, we may not be able to do it this way. I just want it to be as clear as possible, so people can decide what route they want to go. If they're looking to have their property designated and expecting tax credits and all this wonderful stuff, and they go through that process, and then it turns out they hit a big hurdle, and stuff slows down, and a bunch of work that they've worked for and paid for is for nothing.
So then that would suggest another draft of the alteration application that would follow a little more along the lines of the example, to be more transparent, a little clearer what our requirements are.
Yep, I can definitely do that.
Yeah, we do mention the Secretary of Interior standards, but I could see people kind of flipping through that so they can check the box and then moving forward.
Do we have anything specific? I mean, do we have something that we for sure would say no, or something that we for sure would say yes? I think we should give them the opportunity to make sure that they understand what we are asking them to do. And if it's the whole ball of wax, then okay, that's what we're doing. But specifically for this commission, I think we
Right.
could be as clear as possible. I agree with Jim. I want this process to be as easy and as clear as possible, so they aren't coming back again and again and again trying to get this thing through.
Yeah, we're kind of balancing, you know, keeping and respecting the historic atmosphere of our community, and at the same time, a huge benefit of this is getting those tax credits and encouraging people to take on these old buildings and these projects. So yeah, making it clear cut, and yeah, we really got to make sure that it's easy and
And I agree with that, Mike. I think if they will read this, if we get this application as clear as possible, so that when they read through it, even if they're flipping through, and they can see that there are certain things that they must comply with, it'll be a lot easier than them going away and then saying, oh, I didn't know about that.
Also, having the additional detail spelled out provides perhaps more opportunities for consultation with them in advance of their formal submittal, as Lisa was suggesting, so that the dialogue or the interaction could help provide them with some guidance. I recall that from Park County that they saw a great benefit in that interaction, that, you know, the example was windows, and it gave them an opportunity to talk about with the applicant the benefits and how to restore an old window as opposed to just ripping it out and replacing it. So it having that additional detail, if it prompts them to contact staff or seek further guidance. And we might even say if something's unclear, or if you would request further information, please identify a list of those topics and then have a pre-submittal conference to clear up those items.
Yeah, I foresee that being a great benefit, having a meeting with owners before even they submit any of these applications.
Otherwise, the temptation might be to be pretty perfunctory in filling out the application, you know, get it in, get it submitted, get it acted on, whereas going, as you've suggested, a little more detail might initially take a little more effort, but over the long run, save a lot of redos.
Yeah. And it can be, the questions they have are pretty basic, but there's one that would, I think, make people question their design. Will the construction or alteration covered by this application make any change in the appearance of the property as viewed from the exterior of the property? Because I think a lot of people, they may see, a window on the front of their building, and it would look great as some French doors. But, that's stuff that, we gotta be careful with.
It's almost like an algorithm, right? If they first meet this one, then you can keep going, right?
Yeah.
And in regards to that, making that change to the application in the draft, do you want that, would that be a replacement to the already checklist that's on the current draft, or in addition to?
Yeah, I think it'd fall under scope of work. They have their little questionnaire.
Yep.
It's scope of work questions. Yeah, kind of an expansion of that scope of work. Yeah, we have one box modification. And, I see you check that and you're good to go. But what is that modification gonna take away, or is it gonna be demolition of something historical on that building or property or exterior? So we're looking at some expansion of the scope, expansion, kind of changing the scope of work maybe into more of questions. And then also looking into the ordinance under Part G, whether that's a requirement for our CLG to have that or not.
And then we can review this at our next meeting.
Yes, yep.
Great,
I hope to hear back from them before then.
yeah.
And I will also reach out to the city attorney as well.
So I'll entertain a motion to table discussion on the certificate of alteration application, so we can review the discussed suggestions, changes in next meeting.
I so move that we table it until our next meeting.
A second.
Roll call.
Mike,
Aye.
Jim,
Aye.
Cindy's aye. Carol?
Aye.
Motion's passed. Do we have any public comments in general announcements?
There are a couple upcoming CLG training webinars and workshops. July 14th, they're doing a workshop on diversity, equity, and accessibility and inclusion. On July 21st, they're doing the State Historic Preservation Office is doing a webinar on African American travel and Green Book sites. And then on August 11th, they are doing another webinar on evaluating the integrity of historic districts. And I believe actually the same day that our next historic preservation meeting, August 25th, is another workshop on integrity.
When was the first one?
Evaluating integrity in historic districts is August 11th. And all of these are accessible, and you can register for those via the CLG training portal.
So what was on July 21st?
July 21st is the webinar on African American travel and
Oh, okay.
Green Book sites.
Gotcha.
I know all the webinars will be recorded and be accessible at a later date. However, any of the workshops that they do will not be. You have to register for those because they're more interactive and hands-on.
Oh, dang, so the one that they just had isn't going to be recorded or won't be?
Was it a workshop or a webinar?
It was a workshop on public involvement.
Ooh, I'm hoping they'll probably do it again.
Yeah.
We'll have to look for it.
Carol, you
And
sat in
Yeah,
on,
I watched that one. There was the preservation officer from Fort Collins had a very good idea about publicity and how to get a hold of people, and the other one was the other gal, who was she? But I did watch it, so.
great, well, we can discuss. I intended to, I registered, but wasn't able to
Oh.
get back in time.
Yeah, hopefully, if it wasn't a workshop, the webinars would be
Okay.
recorded, and eventually, you might want to check this CLG training portal. They usually get them out at least a week or two out from the actual date.
All right, any other announcements or discussion?
Do we have a guest? Does he want to say something?
Do you want to say anything?
Is that Bob Solomon?
Yeah,
So he's going to be on our committee?
Yes, Bob Solomon will be on our subcommittee for historical context and
Good,
surveying.
okay,
That's great.
great.
Very good. Well, if there's nothing else, this meeting's adjourned.